The hardest part about this quarantine is the lack of human touch. I can see my son and his family. I talk to them on the FaceTime every day. But my granddaughter is 6 years old, which means she's changing all the time. Just a couple of days ago, I asked if she wanted me to read her the Mulan picture book that she always enjoyed. She shrugged. Not really. I don't like Mulan. My head spun. It takes longer to recover from that than it used to. Are you okay, Grandpa? Yes, Melosi, I lied. When did you stop liking Mulan? I thought she was your favorite princess. She looked away from the camera, bored. I don't know, since forever, I guess. Children are eternally frustrated by their perceived powerlessness over the adults in their lives. They have no idea that their ability to devastate us is absolute. Later that night, I left the book in the attic. I keep a box up there. It's filled with things that I don't want to throw away, but I'm perfectly aware that I'll never use again. My son will likely put that box in a dumpster after I die. I had been a part of her life for 1,913 consecutive days before it suddenly became dangerous for a person as old as me to be around his family. It was certainly hard for all of us, but they had moved forward. I had other books though, and I was very grateful that she hadn't outgrown Where the Wild Things Are. Heck, I hadn't outgrown it. She was by herself in the bedroom, almost ready to go to sleep, when I had noticed the man in the corner. My heart rate skyrocketed. The wild rumpus had just begun. I couldn't afford to stop reading. Grandpa, why are you breathing funny? Melosi asked in confusion. The curtain fluttered. A floor-to-ceiling curtain hung next to her bed, and it was unmistakably hiding the form of a tall figure. As I watched, a weathered hand grabbed the edge and pulled it closer in a clear attempt to hide itself. He was listening. I could not let him know that I had seen him. My granddaughter's life depended on it. But my pulse would not come down. Screw it. I had lived bigger lies than this. I cleared my throat. Melosi, when somebody gets to be my age, they're proud just to be breathing at all. I chuckled. She didn't laugh, but I sounded completely calm even if my heart wouldn't cooperate. I was sweating when I got to the part where the monsters were begging Max to say, declaring that, "We love you so." I had one eye glued to the man in the corner, yet was giving an Oscar-worthy performance. But time was short. I could not tell Melosi to get her parents. He had grabbed her before she left the room. I was using my cell to speak with her, and I didn't have a computer or a landline. You'll never need it, my son had said before pressuring me to cancel the service, so there was no way to call for help. I had to keep her on the line. The curtain rustled again. The man was getting antsy. And why not? He was clearly waiting for her to go to bed so that he could strike. The only thing in his way was my bedtime story. My pulse quickened. I felt like I was floating. I had a body of Sectrol in my bathroom. It wouldn't fix my heart, nothing would, because there's no warranty on body parts that will eventually burn or rot. But it would calm me enough to get through the next few minutes with a clearer head. But I would have to get up and walk to the bathroom. I would have to break my concentration. The toe of a dirty black boot slid out from behind the curtain. I didn't have time for Sectrol. I didn't have time for much at all. And I crooned evenly. It was still hot. I didn't want to close the book because that meant my plan was finished. I had nothing left. I closed the book. A bulge rolled down the curtain. The man was running his fingers along the fabric, itching to get out. Melosi yawned. Do you have one more story, Grandpa? I swallowed. I'm not sure where my Mulan book is, so... Okay, she sighed. Good night. She reached forward to turn off the phone while the curtain behind her twitched. "Wait," I instructed calmly. She paused. "We don't choose the hand we're dealt, that's for sure. But when you've only got one card left, you play it like you've got the keys to the whole kingdom." I closed my eyes, breathed out, and then opened them and stared directly at her. "Melosi, you need to listen very carefully and not waste a second. There's a man behind your curtain who's about to come out and hurt you. Don't call for your mom or dad, because there isn't time for them to save you. You need to focus. Close your eyes, be happy, relax. What makes you shine the brightest?" She blanched, and then she closed her eyes. "Melosi, last year, Mommy and Daddy took me to the Florida Keys, and we went to an island where we were the only people. Daddy told me that I could be princess of the island as long as we were the only ones there." Pain ripped across my chest. I was supposed to have gone with them, but my doctor restricted travel on account of my recent hypertension diagnosis. They went without me and had the vacation of their lives. A hand with dirty fingernails pulled the curtain back. I projected calm. "You are a princess, Melosi, remember that." I smiled. A man emerged from the shadows. The phone shook as my hand trembled. "Is he behind me, Grandpa?" she whispered. "Yes," I answered in a voice that was barely audible. He was wearing a black fisherman's hat that had obscured his face. A long trench coat covered most of his body. His filthy hands were the only exposed flesh. I forced a smile. "You remember that you can be a princess, you can be whatever you want, and no one can tell you any different as long as you don't believe them. You understand?" His boot hit the ground with a clunk. She froze. "Melosi, do you understand me?" Another clunk. She blinked once, pursed her lips and nodded, and then calm settled on her face and she smiled. "A girl is a princess if just one person who loves her says so. Do you see that? You will always be a princess to me, Melosi. Always." A peace came over her, and in that moment, it would not have been realistic for me to ask for anything more. I drew in a shuddering breath and I realized that within a few seconds, I had watched her grow up just a little bit, and I lost a piece of myself to the mundane reality that we approached the end by dying in parts. "Now," I ordered softly, "you need to meet this, Melosi. It's not fair to ask this at your age, but I can't stop it now." She smiled calmly. And then my granddaughter stood up, turned around, and faced the man in her room. He reached a dirty hand toward her as she closed her eyes, and then she kicked one leg out, her pink sock connecting against his knee with a sickening crack. The man screamed as his leg bent sideways and he pitched forward. Melosi raised a fist into the air. His momentum brought the full force of his fall into her tiny hand. He bounced off like a bottle rocket, sailing across the room and crashing against the opposite wall. Shattered plasters spiderwebbed around him, and he collapsed to the floor in a heap. Broken drywall and dust swirled down to cover the man, but he lay still. He probably wouldn't be moving much at all in the coming weeks, considering his heel was nestled against his ear. "Melosi!" My son's voice screamed from downstairs. Frantic footsteps followed. My granddaughter collapsed to the ground, breath heaving as her eyelids closed. "I'm really tired now, Grandpa," she slurred. "It's okay, I promise," I responded meekly, my voice tiny and faint. "It's okay, you did wonderful. You're safe, you're safe." Her head allowed to one side. "That was very hard. Please, Grandpa," she sighed. "Please don't make me do that again." My son's footsteps raced through the hall toward her room. "It's okay, I promise," I said through a smile as I wiped my eyes. "I promise that you're safe." I took in a deep, rattling breath as the bedroom door flew open. You can rest easy, Melosi. You're part of a very, very special family. Her head lolled onto her shoulder as the bedroom door burst open. Melosi! Sammy bellowed across the room as he bent down and scooped up his daughter. The phone screen spun and I had to close my eyes to avoid getting seasick. When I opened them again, my daughter-in-law was looking back at me, her face powder white. Dad? She asked shakily. Dad, what the heck happened? The man in the corner, I said. It was hard to focus. The survivalistic calm that had guided me through the attack was now abating, leaving nothing but unfiltered adrenaline to rake my raw nerves. I tried again and failed again to control my heart rate. He came for her, Tina, I said. There are more and I'm certain of it. You have to. The phone screen spun again before my son's face came into focus. Dad, how the heck did he get in here? What did Melosi do to him? Sammy, they found you. They found her. None of you are safe. Did he touch her? Is she hurt? When Sammy was 9, he had jumped off a roof and landed on his arms. He ran into the house sobbing and I nearly fainted when I saw that his lower arm hung in a Z-shape. He closed his eyes and thrusted the damage toward me. I could see the anxiety wash away from him as my own 40-year-old heart absorbed it like a sponge. He trusted me to take care of everything. Fortunately, my ticker was strong enough to handle it at the time. Whether it still possessed that strength was a question that would remain unanswered, because he no longer relied on me to take his pain away. No, I answered emphatically. You should have seen her, Sammy. You would have been so proud. We'll have to talk later, Dad. He hung up. I called immediately back. I know enough about how phones work to understand what it means when it goes straight to an answering machine after 2 rings. I set the phone down and let the floodgates open, finally allowing the emotions to seep into every crevice of my being. I'm an old man. Traumatic experiences affect us differently than they do the rest of you. We don't think of experiences as a call to grow, because every step forward brings the end closer. I felt my mind splinter. I could see a lily-white glacier crack as a crevice opened up, spreading apart 2 sides that would never again be whole. But the broken piece had not yet fallen away entirely. I opened my eyes, slipped into my bathroom to take a dose of Sectrol, and then tried to relax my shaking hands. It turns out that Melosi is better at calming herself than I am. I'm so proud of her. And then I clenched my teeth, turned around, and headed out the door. Sammy and his family lived across town, and I didn't have enough time to drive. The average car trip took 31 minutes and 53 seconds. The clock was ticking. I had several miles to cover and just minutes to get there. And so I ran. We're a very special family. The front door was unlocked, which was not a good sign. I slammed it shut behind me and locked it. Sammy, Tina, Melosi, I called out. I realized that I might actually have a heart attack right here in my son's house, because I couldn't find a way to unpanic myself. I realized with an eerie calm that such an outcome might be acceptable. Slowly I ascended the stairs. Please come out, I need to know that you're okay. The bedroom door in front of me slowly opened. I suddenly realized that I should have taken a weapon, a knife, a rock, even a rubber ducky, just something. But I could do nothing besides stand and wait for the person on the other side to see me. It was Tina. Relief washed over me as I ran into her arms for a hug. Sammy and Melosi, I asked shakily. Together in our bedroom, she whispered. I pulled away and darted through the door. Sammy was cradling her sleeping form. She seemed so fragile, but not as much as he did. I still have fleeting memories of my own childhood belief that parents, even when they're being unfair, possess a bedrock strength that can endure any worldly trouble that a young child faces. It's only much later in life that we realize no parent has any idea what the heck they're doing, but the best ones can fake it without profound confidence. "Hi, Sammy," I offered calmly. "Hey, Dad," he sighed. We were both silent for a beat. "We need to leave," I finally offered, quiet but emphatic. "Tonight, now." He closed his eyes. "No." Nothing can piss you off like a child who won't listen, especially if that child is a grown adult. My heart rate had never gone down, but now it was rising once more. "Sammy," I responded louder than I had intended. "There are some things we want but can't have. There are some things you need to let me decide for myself. You can't control what's happening. It was your choice when I was a child. It's my choice when I'm an adult." "Well, then act like one," I snapped. I didn't plan on sounding angry despite what came across. Melosi stirred in his arms. She would be awake soon. We both had so much to say, but were suddenly unable to navigate the silence. "What do they want from us?" Tina broke in softly. I looked over to where she stood, thin and waif-like, yet somehow more solid than either of us in the moment. "Do you not understand?" I pressed, panic starting to catch fire at the edges of my mind. "After everything, do you really not get what will happen if she's found? If we're all found? Dad, at a certain point we have to just live our lives, or the cure is worse than. They'll put her in the Harlequin heaven. Even at her age, Sammy, she'll never ever get out." I could hear the pulse in my ears at this point, but I stopped trying to resist it. "You too, Tina, but you'll never see your daughter again. I'll end up dead in the lab and you probably will too, Sammy, and we'll be the lucky ones." I tried, and I failed to be discreet about wiping away my tears of frustration. We'd all be better off dead. I would certainly choose that fate for us if presented with the alternative. The silence that followed was powerful enough to feel on a physical level. Melosi broke out, nestling up against her father's shirt. "Daddy, I want to go to sleep." Tina looked up at me wide-eyed. "Dad, I understand what you're saying." Her eyes darted back and forth between Sammy and me. "We both do. Look, let's get a good night's sleep and have you back in the morning. We'll all be in a better position to decide our next move." I closed my eyes and clutched my hair in frustration. There's an unconscious man in the next room who came to kidnap Melosi. He was working for someone else who knows where we live. I opened my eyes. "Have you checked to even see if he's awake? Do you know if he's told anybody what happened?" Tina and Sammy glanced nervously at each other. "You didn't call the police, did you? They definitely tapped your phones before making their move. If you made any calls since the attack, you just gave them all the information that they need." Sammy shifted uncomfortably as Melosi squirmed in his lap. "Dad, there's no way they could have blocked our phones, and the police are better equipped to." I punched the wall in frustration. "Do you not understand how powerful Delora is? Sammy, it's already too late to." The sound of shattering glass cut me off. Everyone froze. Downstairs, the door shook in its frame as somebody pushed against it from outside. Nausea overwhelmed me as the turning lock creaked loudly in the otherwise silent house. The front door opened, and a man's footsteps walked boldly inside. He pressed the barrel of his pistol against my forehead and I winced. My wrists pulled reflexively against the rope, though I found little slack. It just wasn't enough to pull away. I couldn't change what was in front of me, and so I relaxed. I smiled. "What the heck are you grinning at?" he had asked through teeth that clenched the butt of a cigarette. "If we can't smile in our final moments, what kind of life have we led?" I asked steadily. He ran one hand across a dirty, stubbly cheek and then spit the cigarette into the trash heap on the floor of the van. "You're a weirdo. I've got no idea what Delora wants with you." He cocked his head. "You're still worth a ton as a carcass, though. Not as much as you would be alive, though, sure. Man, you did pick a bad night to get found." He looked around the cramped, windowless van. the ceiling of which held my bonds tightly in place. How many people you think can fit in here? I breathed slowly, wondering if I was about to die or instead live another 60 years. It's whatever you decide. He grunted, grabbed another cigarette, lit it, and placed the lighter precariously on his center console. He still kept the gun pressed tightly against my forehead. Tell me something, man, if I find you with nothing in your pockets but a vial of oil and some prayer beads. He breathed the smoke in deeply. How do you expect to protect yourself unarmed? I smiled again, but sadder this time. We're all dead, every one of us, it's just a matter of timing. I wanted to be free, so I accepted that. He snorted. That's stupid. The air thickened and I could feel his finger tensing. I didn't breathe. His cell phone rang and I let out the air I didn't realize that I had been holding. He listened, swore, and hung up. Byron got his leg wrapped around his head. I told him to not go after the girl alone. The man lowered his gun and turned around to face forward the driver's seat. We got less than 0 minutes to take care of this. You'll have to sit tight. Don't worry if there isn't enough room for everyone. I'll find a nice ditch for you. He started the engine. Things are bad. God, things are bad. He spun the van in a complete 180 and then floored it. I had only my ropes to keep him in place as we barreled through the night. I felt sick. The girl, I asked tentatively. Everyone? Yeah, he muttered, flying precariously down the dark road. You'll be sharing space with them, so make some room back there. I pulled fruitlessly against the ropes. Can you tell me where we're going? He snorted again. A whole family of freaks and Byron went in alone, idiot. I felt like it was important to keep him talking, and so I did. How big is the family? The man spit on the floor, his phlegm staying in place, shaking gelatinously. 3, mom, dad, little girl. Dolores paying big, especially for the girl. God, Byron, you're such an idiot. So dangerous. He pressed the accelerator down further and the cigarette lighter fell from the center console. It hit the floor and slid toward the back. I quietly stopped it with my shoe and held it in place. You know anything about C4, man? He asked, patting a large duffel bag in the passenger seat. Several seconds passed before I realized that he was talking to me. I knew that it was a non-volatile but very effective. I knew that's why people like him carried it. And I knew that people asked questions of that nature because they enjoy hearing themselves talk. Why don't you tell me? I asked, trying to sound curious. He laughed. Byron was driving a van full of it while getting blown by a recent girl that he captured. Drove off the road, flipped the van, killed the girl, but the C4 didn't react at all. He guffawed. Later, we used it to take down a 4-story building. It's there when you need it. It'll do just fine on a 2-story house. He pulled to a stop some distance away from an ordinary-looking home. Don't go anywhere, he joked before hefting the duffel from the seat next to him and sliding out the door. I remained still for 1 second. And then I slipped off my shoe, grabbed the lighter with my foot and lifted it up to my hand before forcing re-entry into the shoe. I then forced my breast pocket right up against my fingertips, plucking the tiny vial of anointing oil from within. I quickly poured all of it down my wrists, lubricating the bonds as much as possible, and then I pulled hard. My wrist started to slide out, but not all the way, the bind was too tight. Shakily, I struck the lighter and held it to the oiled rope. A weak flame flickered to life, dancing along the edge of the rope and licking my palm with a hateful tongue. The pain was instantly unbearable, so I closed my eyes and drew the pain inward, and I felt free. And then I pulled. My hands met resistance and I pulled harder, but nothing happened. I redoubled my efforts, pulling with everything that I had the ability to muster, but still nothing. The flames were growing bigger now and the pain was rising along with it. Again, I drew in the pain. I didn't fight it. I pulled, I drew. The rope sizzled and it popped. the edge of it frayed. I pulled harder as the tear inched open. Fiber by fiber, the rope ripped apart, and in that moment I realized that I would not stop pulling, simply because I had no other choice. It turns out that we like to say impossible to mean uncomfortable when we fear our own potential. The rope shredded, cracked, snapped, and hurt more than I had thought possible, and then I was free. I gasped, lying on the floor of the van, and examined my hand. Not a scratch on it. It's funny to look back on what felt like the most painful moments imaginable, only to realize that they were minor blessings. The oil was empty, so I let the discarded vial go. A quick pat of my pocket confirmed that the beads were in place, which was enough. I quietly opened the door, wondering how far I could run before the man noticed that I was gone. Far enough, I imagine. I thought of the family in the house that was about to be attacked, and I tried not to cry. It would be a fool's errand to interfere. I had to accept that. And I ran. I didn't stop until I was at their front door. I tried desperately to open it, but it was locked. I froze. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw my captor walking around to the back of the house. Remembering the C4, I realized that he was almost certainly rigging the structure before moving to the unsuspecting family inside. No matter what choice I made at this point, I was probably going to die. I punched my elbow through the small window next to the door handle, drawing back quickly enough to avoid injury, and then I reached around, fumbling with the lock as I rattled the door in its frame to test when it would open. I felt the lock give, and then I turned the knob and opened the door. I walked quickly inside. Arriving at the bottom of a staircase, I yelled urgently upward, knowing they might attack and kill me if I didn't alert them to my presence. "Listen to me, please. You're in a lot of danger right now and you need to leave this house. I know you don't know who I am, but I promise that I'm here to help, and you need to trust me. My name is Sebastian and I have a lot to tell you." Silence wrapped the room. The walls seemed to be holding both their breath and my own, and I quickly understood that something was very wrong. I peered up the stairs into the dark and saw no one. I looked left, I looked right, I looked up at the ceiling. And that's where she floated, looking down at me with a cross of wrath and hunger that forced me to wonder once again why I had decided that this house was the best place to die. A red light shined from the top of the stairs. My head swam as I realized that I was looking at a baseball bat, glowing red hot, clutched by a frightened man whose sweaty face reflected the impossible object in his hands. Apparently, these people had mastered both flight and the ability to generate heat energy in the objects that they touched. It seemed that they were a very special family. "You're the second person to break into this house tonight, and you're about to be the second person broken by it." The man growled with an unstable mixture of fear and anger. William Faulkner once said that time is dead as long as it's being clicked off by little wheels. Only when the clock stops does time come to life. I force myself to remember this when the stress of a moment threatens to consume me, and I need to smile instead. "My friend, I'm almost certainly going to die here tonight, but your little girl's fate is still very much undetermined, and you must realize that more people than just me are coming to your home." I breathed deeply, trying to calm myself. "You have to make a decision right now, because you can't recover a past moment, and what has been done can never be undone." I looked straight up at the woman hovering on the ceiling. "There's a man just outside your house who's about to hurt you in ways that have no healing. I'm going to find him and he's going to attack me. This will delay his focus by no more than 30 seconds. Run." I turned and walked toward the front door. The 91st Psalm tells us that we will not fear the terror of the night, and that passage had always given me comfort. I realized for the first time that it never said we were safe from the threat. Our call was simply to cast away fear regardless of the outcome. The hands on my shoulders nearly threw me to the floor. I staggered to find my footing. The woman had flown on top of me and the man was racing to my side. "You have 1 minute to tell us who the heck you are and what's going on, and that minute started when you opened the door. Go." His fear was clearly overcoming his anger, and that was a very dangerous thing. No, I responded simply yet urgently. We have 0 seconds left. You have to let me distract them. Then you need to run and never stop. This is your only opportunity. I turned for the door, but he grabbed my shoulder and held me fast. I closed my eyes. I've told you everything you need to know. Please, have faith in me. Faith is in short supply, pal. His grip was painfully strong. It wouldn't be faith otherwise, I answered. You can convince me if you try. I can't. He raised the bat high above his head. It was glowing white. I suddenly realized that he had almost certainly killed for his daughter more than once. I'm sorry, I responded miserable, but the moment has passed and it's already too late. My van captor emerged from the shadows, one gun in each hand. He was aiming at both the man and the woman. Apparently, he didn't consider me a threat. The two of them were facing me though and did not see him right away. They did notice my reaction, however. Slowly, they turned around. I don't know how the heck you got out of my van, but you're quickly becoming more trouble than you're worth, he growled before spitting on the floor. He whipped his hand into his waistband, pulled out a pair of handcuffs, and tossed them to the man with the bat. He instinctively let go of me and caught the cuffs. Nice catch, Sammy. Now you can throw that bat right out of the window if you don't want me to shoot your wife in the chest, he snapped. Sammy hesitated for just a second, and then he tossed his only weapon through the glass that I had broken. The other man grinned, blackened teeth showing beneath his black stubble. That was your only card to play, idiot, he cackled. Now cuff this guy to the radiator pipe. You're not going anywhere this time, cutie. I didn't resist as Sammy obediently locked my right wrist to the pipe, forcing me to remain in a seated position for what happened next. Still holding his pistols aloft, the man slowly approached the woman. Both she and Sammy remained still. The man leaned his face into her neck. He sniffed her hair. Just like Mama used to smell. He groaned, licking his lips. Speaking of which, Mama, where's your little girl? Her lips pinched shut and turned to sheet white. He pressed the barrel of the gun against her throat. There's the hard way out and the harder way out. Mama, so you better give me what I need. The staircase creaked. She shook her head, the first tears starting to fall down her cheeks, as Sammy took half a step away from me and toward his wife. Why don't you keep those feet quiet? The grimy man whispered dangerously, extending his pistol arm closer. Sammy, don't move, she whispered. Just wait. The stair creaked again, but only I seemed to notice. I could barely make out a figure in the dark, though it was easy enough to understand what was happening. The man on the staircase was older, in his 70s at least, and looked remarkably like Sammy. The girl's grandfather must have arrived without my captor's knowledge, because he had only described the family as consisting of 3 individuals. The grandfather was about to make a foolish move against great odds. Wait, I interjected, hoping to buy a few seconds of time. And think this through, Sammy here. I nodded. Can clearly burn things with his hands. You tied me up once and then used these cuffs as a last resort. So I think that you only have the one pair and we're saving it. Sammy could probably burn through any metal rope that you have, which creates a problem with no easy solution. I know that you came alone and that your only potential ally was injured upstairs before we arrived. How do you plan to hold these people? The best case scenario is that you have to kill all of us, which will anger your employer. This assumes you aren't overcome and killed by a hidden ability of theirs, which is very possible and even likely. But if you leave them now, you can walk away with just me, and return to find them some other time. The grandfather had reached the bottom step. It creaked. The man whirled around as the grandfather moved impossibly fast, almost fast enough. The man shot him in midair, and he collapsed to the ground as his family screamed. Dad! Sammy shouted, lunging forward. Not so fast, Grizzlebeard warned, spinning around and aiming the pistol at Sammy's forehead. Everyone froze. In the silence, the grandfather's gasping was agonizingly loud. That's a gunshot, Grizzlebeard gurgled, licking his lips. Painful and deadly in the best of times. Really not so great for an old fart like him. Now, Sammy, are we going to behave? Sammy's eyes darted back and forth between his wheezing father and a fireplace poker just beyond reach. Sammy, I need an answer if you want your wife's brains to stay on the inside of her head, he pressed. Sammy rolled an angry eye toward the man. What do you want? He asked through clenched teeth. Our captor smiled. It takes a very special circumstance to make a smile ugly, but the man seemed to find pleasure in accomplishing rare and torrid feats. I just want to take a ride, and I want to do it without any complaining from your family, and I want your sweet little girl to come out of hiding. He pointed his second weapon at the wife once more. Tina, isn't it? Call to your daughter. Tina, or I'll shoot the teeth out of your cheeks and leave you conscious to feel it. Tears rolled down her face, but she remained silent. I'm realizing that I never introduced myself, he cooed. You can call me Seville. You tell your daughter that she needs to come down and meet me, or I'll go and find her and do all the things you're afraid that I'll do to her. I'll make it real. Tina swallowed. Don't do it, Sammy whispered. Without opening her eyes, she called. Melosi, I need you to come here now. Her voice was uncannily steady. The staircase creaked and a tiny face immediately popped into view. She had been with us for some time. There's a tasty girl, Seville groaned. Now you all need to listen very carefully because I can't have you causing a ruckus once you're in my van. You're all going to drink something that'll put you right to sleep, and old Seville will take care of everything from there, got it? He kept the pistols aimed unwaveringly at the two parents. The grandfather heaved in the corner. Oh, and your old man's going out with the garbage. There's enough C4 attached to the back of the house to level half this structure. He nodded to me. Sebastian here is nothing but trouble. I set the whole thing up for you folks as a little surprise that he went and just ruined. Anyway, the point is that there ain't no going back. This house will take down Grandpa, and I imagine what's left of Byron upstairs will get mangled in the mess. We'll just say that things got out of hand if anybody asks. Okay, folks? He shot a glob of snot onto the ground. It was black, red, and quivering. Sammy focused on the floor. You came into my home because you thought a family of strangers had more good than bad. He let out his breath in a whoosh. Most people would not, I certainly didn't. He nodded. I was ready to kill you, I had no doubts, but you were determined to prove me wrong. And then he stared right at me. Thank you for that. He did not break eye contact as he spoke. I'm never going to see my family again. Am I right? I think I am. Seville, you'll promise just enough to get us to follow you, and we will be far too late before we realize how bad a decision it was. He closed his eyes. We'll wish that we were right back here, telling you no from the very beginning. He reached out for the fireplace poker. You really want to make your daughter watch you die, Seville growled. No, Sammy responded steadily, snatching up the poker as it glowed white hot. I want her first kill to be avenging her father. Sammy lunged. Seville fired without hesitation. Sammy's head snapped back like a sprung door stopper as he collapsed to the floor. Several voices screamed. Movies endeavor to make violent deaths seem glorious, but the reality is that a broken head is a very gruesome thing. I wanted desperately to close my eyes, but I needed to understand what was happening. Sammy had given just enough time for his family to move on Seville. Tina flew into the air and was descending on him. Melosi had dived in for his knees. He had almost bought them enough time. Seville quickly understood the move. and he realized that there was only enough time to react to one person. He chose Tina. Her eyes grew wide in that final moment, but she had no time for any other physical reaction. He shot her in the forehead, knocking her out of the sky just as Myuuji made contact with his knee. She apparently had the ability to conjure great physical strength, because the move pinwheeled him into the air, screaming as his leg flopped in directions that his knee were not supposed to bend. He landed with a horrifying crunch just as Myuuji collapsed onto her mother's dead form. "Myuuji," I screamed, straining painfully against the handcuffs. "Run!" She didn't react, but Seville did. Eyes spinning, he drew himself into a sitting position and then stared in shock at his shattered leg. "Let her go," I warned. "She's not worth it. She's too dangerous." He looked at me and sneered, and then turned to face the little girl who refused to move away from her mother's body. "I already figured that out, thanks," he answered dazedly. And then he lifted his pistol and aimed it at her. "But she's still valuable as a corpse." I wanted to close my eyes but couldn't. He drew a deep breath and prepared to fire the gun. Some time ago, I was taught that prayers shouldn't focus on getting me the things that I want. Instead, they should ask to reveal the strength that we always had but never knew. I was finally able to close my eyes and I prayed, and then I opened them again, because I owed it to Myuuji to witness what happened next. Each of us had the ability to do extraordinary things that are a leap of faith away from being believable. I believe that Seville had the strength to overcome himself that night, to put aside every element of the path laid out before him, and choose the right thing. The twin half of the ability and tendency to do good is the ability and tendency to do evil. It wasn't evilness that drove us from the garden, but choice. Every aspect of our instinct can be overcome, which is a truly remarkable gift that we rarely pause to digest. So it was truly Seville's own fault when he squeezed the trigger. I prayed for his own forgiveness in that moment because if he could be saved, then the rest of us are truly blessed. "Myuuji," I instructed calmly, "close your eyes." I don't know if she had time to follow my guidance before he shot her, but she was dead prior to hitting the floor. He turned and stared at me, balancing delicately on the one leg that hadn't been destroyed. I met his gaze. "I hope that what comes next is better for all of us," I forced through the tears. He cast his eyes downward, taking several seconds to find his next words. "Yeah, this is a total loss," he explained quietly. "Now I'm going to unlock you." Here he patted his breast pocket. "But first, I'm going to clean up the mess." He reached into his pants pocket, fumbling with something that beeped once. The explosion was shocking enough that it might have knocked me to the ground if I had been standing, but Seville just smiled and turned carefully around. The back half of the house had been blown apart, though the room that we were in was relatively unscathed. For the moment, every window had been shattered, drawing in a steady breeze that wafted across my face, along the rug over the couch, past a support beam perched precariously at the edge of the broken floor, and into the smoldering mud where there used to be a kitchen. Seville was speaking, but my ears were ringing too loudly to hear him at first. "I said don't mess around." His voice fought feebly through the painful buzzing in my own head. "I'm going to toss you the key. You'll unlock yourself and we'll take the cuffs back to my van. I'll get the bounty on your head and we'll just tell Delora that I had no choice but to blow up the whole family." He looked up and cocked his head to the side, tossing greasy hair over his shoulder. "We'll leave out the sordid details, friend. It'll be our little secret." An acrid smell met my nose then, and I nearly gagged. Looking into the rubble, I could see that a small fire had started and was quickly growing. The explosion must have caused it, directly or indirectly, but broken gas pipes need a little coaxing to cause major problems. "Looks like there'll be a cookout tonight," Seville cackled. It's for the best that these bodies get torched. Corpses have a way of causing such trouble when left behind. He drew in a deep and noisy sniff. Oh my, do I love the smell of a little girl well done. A painful, guttural growling came from the waist behind him. Confused, Seville turned around. He should have used the moment to escape. The girl's grandfather rose up dirty, bleeding, yelling, and very angry. Seville didn't even have time to brace himself before the man dove low into his waist, knocking the wind from his gut and sending the pair flying headlong into the lone support beam. Seville's head made contact with a sickening crack, and the entire beam snapped in half. An enormous section of smoldering rubble cascaded down in a cloud of noise and fire and dust. I closed my eyes, clutching white-knuckled at the handcuffs, knowing that I would have to accept my fate if the destruction saw fit to overwhelm me. On that day, it did not. The noise stopped first and then the dust, but the fire was growing angrier. I stared into the mess to see if either person had survived. Slowly, one of them came into view. Every electric light in the house had blown out and the dust was still thick, but my eyes were adjusting as the dust thinned, and the contours of this person were becoming clearer. There was undoubtedly only one figure before me. The other had certainly been buried beneath the flaming rack. I wanted to pray for the grandfather's life, but wondered if he had any desire to survive such an ordeal. Instead, I prayed for the peace to see past my own disgust at the violence that I had witnessed that night. And when the dust had settled, 5 things were clear. The first is that Seville was in front of me. The grandfather was nowhere to be found. I hoped that he wasn't suffering. The second is that the lower half of Seville's body had been completely crushed beneath the wreckage. Everything below his stomach was buried under tons of rubble. There would be no way to extract him without heavy machinery. The third is that he was alive and conscious. He stared wide-eyed at his waist. He was probably in the beginning stages of shock. I reasoned that it was the only thing keeping him from a panic attack. The fourth is that the fire had spread and was now approaching the living room where we were both trapped. We probably had 5 or 10 minutes before the conflagration engulfed us. The fifth is that his gun had been knocked loose in the chaos. I knew because it had landed close to my left hand. Though my right arm was cuffed to the pipe, the weapon was still in reach. I leaned over and plucked it from the ground as the trapped man turned to stare at me, wide-eyed, finally beginning to understand just how much the situation had changed. I glared at the pistol, frowning. I regarded it with distaste before glaring at the vulnerable man before me. He had wanted me dead. Everything that has happened here can be traced back to the power of the gun, I explained over the steadily growing flames. The man gawked at me, hesitant to decide if he was consumed by a greater sense of fear or of anger, still unable to realize that there were 2 words for the same thing. Measuring imbalance with further imbalance will only create a broken scale, I continued evenly. So I ask you, Seville, what is the only way to remove the power of this weapon? I lifted it high enough for both of us to see it clearly. Though I was not aiming it at him, he cringed in fear. I considered the gun a moment longer, then pitched it across the room. He flinched as it slid to a halt right next to him. Seville greedily snatched it up, checked it, and then grinned maniacally at me. That was stupid, he mumbled, unaware of the blood sputtering out of his mouth and dribbling down his stubbly chin. Was it? I asked placidly as the flames drew nearer. You already had the ability to take my life by denying me the handcuff key in your pocket. I jangled the chains against the metal pipe to which I was affixed. And gaining the weapon did nothing to save you from a fate that you put into motion with a dozen different decisions made in the past hour. I stared at him as he attempted to aim the gun at me. So, I have given you nothing other than what you imagine to be real. The gun has been neutralized and will no longer guide our decisions. A disgusted look came over his face, and then he tossed the pistol aside where it disappeared into the rubble. There was no choice to be made after all. This gun was over. We sat in momentary stillness, trapped, each facing and weighing the other as immeasurable seconds ticked down with nothing good to hold them. "We're both going to burn," he gurgled. Though his lower body had been crushed, there was relatively little blood. It seemed that the wreckage was acting as a temporary tourniquet and that he would not bleed out for the moment. What pain he felt was apparently mitigated by the continuing effects of shock. I closed my eyes and leaned against the wall. To dust we shall return. That was always the way our stories would finish, our clearing at the end of the path. Did you believe anything different? He sneered at me. "You're a priest," he said accusatorily. "Yes, it is as you say," I responded. "Why?" he pressed, a note of desperation in his voice. "Look around. You're about to burn to death because we live in a world where nobody cares what will happen to you." I looked intently at him. "I believe in free will and I'm going to burn to death because the object of my faith is real." Another support beam collapsed near the stairs, raining ash and dust on the far side of the room. It was just far enough away to leave us unscathed, but it brought the flames much closer. "All I know is that you're an idiot," he spat. "You had plenty of opportunities to get the heck out of here and you turned down every single one." "True," I nodded. "But right now you'd be dying alone if it weren't for me. Is that what you'd prefer?" He tried to answer my question, but he failed. "Even now, Seville, the object of my faith is powerful enough to govern both our fates. You could free me now and your ability to choose prevents me from surviving. I am about to die for free will. What greater proof of God is there?" "You see me as proof of God?" he asked like I was stupid. "Of this I have no doubt," I answered quickly. "I'd kill that girl again just to watch you suffer," he shot at me. "Screw you, screw this dead family, and screw God." We sat in silence for a spate of time that lost all meaning. As the flames grew steadily noisier and the heat beat down even stronger, his discomfort overtook him. "Do you believe in hell?" "I believe in more," I explained. The first tongues of flame licked the pile of debris that had overtaken him. His breathing grew rapid and shallow. "I was married a long time ago and she made a bad deal with some bad people and thought that she could make up for it by killing me. Would have gone through with it if I had trusted her completely, but I'm not that stupid. When she realized her failure, my wife jumped off the 13th floor of a 19-story building, right when she knew her body would land at my feet. She looked like lasagna when she hit the concrete, and squirmed in a pile of her own guts before she died. I loved her then, and I still love her, but I don't believe in anything good after this, because all I've ever wanted was to ask her why. If she's in hell, then that's where I want to go." Sweat was beginning to cover both of us. "But I don't believe in hell, and I don't believe in more, Father, because there simply isn't anything that great waiting for us. The only reason that we conjure hope for a better afterlife is because the one we're in is so messed up that we want to be rid of it." He shot a mirthless smile at me. "So you're welcome. We're both about to receive the greatest wish that we're too afraid to admit that we crave." I raised an eyebrow. "You're certain that there's nothing after?" He teetered on his palms. "Positive." I smiled. "And that, you see, is faith." He narrowed his eyes in disgust. "The farther we try to run from free will, the tighter we find ourselves ensnared in its consequences. Searching for an explanation beyond our own actions is an act of faith. We can never escape those twin powerful influences of free will and faith. Paradoxically, we're unable to free ourselves from the freedom of our own humanity." The flames had climbed to the top of the rubble pile. Seville was taking great pains to avoid looking behind himself. "I wish I hadn't thrown that gun away," he said. I didn't relish the idea of burning to death, but was not ready to die at my own hand. It seemed, however, that Seville had already accepted his fate, if not his faith. "You want to take the fastest way out," I explained, "but see nothing other than the path that you've illuminated for yourself." He cackled. "Okay, Father, you believe in something bigger." He smiled a nasty smile. "If there is a hell, do you really think you don't deserve to be there?" "Maybe I do," I responded quickly. "I will soon find out." The flames danced in his eyes as he stared at me. "Will anybody miss you when you're dead? Will anybody care if you're in hell?" I exhaled heavily. "Well, that's a hard question, Seville. Perhaps hell is about finding that out. Here's what I think. Whatever we've done with our lives can never be undone. No force would allow it, such is the nature of free will. I imagine that what comes next is complete knowledge of what we've done. Every action, every counteraction, every ripple effect will be played out for us to know. The butterfly effect is eternal, so we will see the never-ending echoes of our existence made unending by people who never knew us. So I don't think it matters if they care about me, because they're living the life that I left for them. But two things remain immutable in that reality. The first is that the material pleasures and belongings that we enjoyed will be forever separated from us, and whatever piece of our soul that we've grafted to this world will be lost. The second is that, no matter how great the regret, we will never again be able to change the world that we left behind, despite having taken that ability for granted every day of our lives. I let out a long, slow breath. Whether that existence is heaven or hell depends entirely on your free will right now, I smiled. And I have faith. I turned to look at my cuffed right wrist. By the way, you didn't throw the pistol as far as you had thought. It's been right behind you, just within your reach the entire time. I ran out of the house with flames licking my back. Fresh, cool night air rushed into my salvaged lungs. Once I was a safe distance away, I collapsed in the grass, gasping between my sobs. When I had regained my breath, I turned to look down at the palm of my hands. The handcuff key that Seville had tossed me seemed too small to wield such consequence. I looked up at the structure now 100 feet away as flames belched out of the living room windows. A single gunshot from within told me that it was time to get up and make my quick exit. The rapidly approaching sirens confirmed this decision. I stood up and half staggered, half jogged back to Seville's van. Grabbing my bag from the floor, I turned around and moved quickly down the road. The first police and fire unit squealed into the driveway as I turned the corner and ducked out of sight. I soon found myself at a crossroads. It was a physical crossroads, but it was metaphysical as well. Every choice is. And for the moment, the world saw me as nothing more than a dark man on the side of the road, and nothing more and nothing less. I would have thought that it'd be quite inconsequential. But the hairs stood up on the back of my neck as a van came racing down the road. Some quality about the way it sped just a little too fast told me that its intentions were desperate, and that things didn't bode well for me. So I made the decision to quell my anxiety just as it sought its peak. I had, after all, been given far more than my fair share of blessings this night. If someone's ill fortune were to spill into my lap, I would still come out the luckier. The van screeched to a halt 15 feet in front of me. I didn't know what to expect, so I expected nothing good. I was not disappointed. 4 of them surrounded me, several brandishing what appeared to be wooden stakes. I wanted to assure them that they would find more peace if they approached me without weapons, but I had no opportunity. One charged my chest, knocking my back to the ground and the wind from my chest, as he lifted me easily and threw me into the van. Honestly, he could have just asked me to come in. The rest followed me, leaving their friend who had accosted me to bring up the rear. "Go!" he screamed at the driver as he put one foot inside. She wasted no time in moving the van, and for a horrifying moment, I realized I was going to watch another person die if he fell beneath the tires. I'd had far too much carnage for one night. I caught his arm and pulled him safely to me. He didn't seem that strong, honestly. I probably could have fought him off if I had been so inclined. And so he lived. I didn't have to witness yet another unnecessary waste, and this filled me with more joy than I had the ability to articulate. "He's smiling," one of them whispered in a voice that they thought was inaudible. "I suppose you're going to press us for some answers now," asked the man that I had pulled to safety. He sounded nervous. I let my smile grow just a bit. I'm hardly in a position to negotiate. They were a motley crew to be sure, but each one was united in a look of truly confused shock as they stared at me. I think they were unable to comprehend that I had chosen to let the anger go. "Sebastian," he shouted at me as I began to jog away from the group. I looked over my shoulder, but I had no intention of going back. "Godspeed." I nodded once and then turned and ran. Silhouetted against the backdrop of a raging fire was a lone man facing something, well, something impossible. I stopped and I knelt to the ground, and I hyperventilated. Shock had gotten me through more than I had realized that night. It was a gift that had suddenly faded in the face of another conflagration that seemed too lethal to be worthwhile. I could leave right here, right now. There was no reason to suffer for people who would sooner hurt me than help me. I felt powerfully alone. I was alone. I searched for a reason to continue into the unknown while walking away was a sure thing. I looked up at the fire. I wondered what forces wanted me to be comfortable and why. I thought about how easy existence is when we use our free will to leave the world unaffected, and just how powerful the drug of comfort truly is. I imagined spending eternity looking back on a life of comfort. The concept of good is hard to pin down because it hurts so much. If the best among us asks why God has forsaken him, then what the heck is the point in pushing forward every day? And then I realized I was alone because everyone in the van had had faith in me. For better or for worse, I was the point. I stood. Of course, I was going to fail eventually. At some point, my body would be unable to handle whatever physical challenge stood in front of me. This one unifying truth is possibly the only constant for all of humanity. From a certain point of view, I had nothing to lose, but the man in front of me did. So I decided that it was worth it to walk forward, at great peril, and see what further dangers awaited me at the end of the night.